Okay. Hello, everybody. How you doing? Welcome to, I think it's a sixth in our series of No Boss Theme webinars, all about humans, the future of work, and purpose, and how to motivate people, how to create high-performing teams, and all that good agile stuff, both from a mindset perspective and from a practical skills-based perspective. We've got a doozy for you this week, and actually it's one of my personal favorite ones. This one is all about a truly agile mindset. Today, we'll be talking about three of the most critical elements to help your organization transform the soft parts of its organization into something that becomes the key predictors of performance. And we'll talk about some research from places like Stanford, as well as corporate research done by organizations such as Google, as well as in some military organizations. The three concepts around mindset, which I'll define as a way of thinking and a philosophy that underpins that thinking. We'll look at it from three angles: growth mindset for you personally, psychological safety for teams and teams of teams, and leadership by intent for anyone in a leadership position, depending on your organizational configuration. That might mean simply every person in the organization, or it might just mean the person at the top. So we aim to give you some practical tips over the course of the next 50 minutes while you're eating your lunch. I strongly encourage you, whilst you're doing that, I'm going to have some pauses as we do each of these concepts to give you an opportunity to make a commitment to yourself about something that you're doing differently. So I strongly encourage you, while you're eating your lunch or doing other things whilst you're listening to this webinar, to take something to write with and make a note. Every time I pause and I say, well, what are you going to do about it? What are you going to do different? What are you going to take away from this conversation, so that post-lunch, post-learning, you've got a set of things that you can take away. Of course, should we have the time, I'll endeavor to have a little bit of time at the end for questions as well. Okie dokie, let's hop right to it. Hello again, my name is Stephen Ma. I serve as the Chief Purpose Officer. I have the privilege of doing so at an organization called NOMOS. We believe that organizations and people are best when they're purpose-driven and purpose-motivated. Therefore, it is our vision to be the most purpose-centric ecosystem in the world. And along the way, we just happen to do consulting while we do that. Along the way, whilst doing consulting, we've had some wonderful clients and wonderful victories. We worked in everything from the Defense Force, Special Forces specifically. We work for non-profits. We've worked for some of the biggest banks in Australia, and indeed some of the biggest organizations worldwide, with a range of industries from retail through to startups, through to consultants, through to telcos, etc. And of course, one thing that's common with them is the space in which people underinvest in this kind of mindset idea. So I'm really excited to talk about this because every single one of these organizations has gone in a bit of an improvement journey around growth mindset, psychological safety, and intent-based leadership. So here they are. I always love to start my webinars with everything that you're going to learn in it in the first 30 seconds. So this is the whole webinar. We're going to talk about growth mindset. It's this concept that enables your personal and professional development. It's basically the idea that skills and personal attributes can be grown. Then we're going to talk about psychological safety. It actually helps you as a team to raise your group intelligence. And it contains two parts: conversational turn-taking and ostentatious listening. A little more on that later. And last but not least, for anyone in a leadership position, we're talking about leading by intent, also known as intent-based leadership. It's a way to enable you to scale your leadership and pass authority to where the information really is in your team and in your organization. All right, let's start with this first one. I promised to do a bunch of research stuff from a few different thinkers more prominent than myself. So Dr. Carol Dweck over at Stanford is a researcher in organizational psychology, and he's a pioneer of this idea of neuroplasticity and what it means for teams. Let's talk about neuroplasticity for a moment. When I was a younger kid at Glenroe Primary School in Melbourne, one of my favorite teachers was by the name of Mrs. McGregor. She was my grade 4 teacher, and I loved her so very much. She was the one teacher that it got me inspired to do, technology programming. She let me code when I was 4 years old on the Apple IIe in the offices, so that was totally awesome. But she did say one thing that stuck with me for a very long time that I've only had to recently unlearn. She said to me, Steve, based on everything that we know about science right now, and I won't tell you how old I am, but it was a fair few decades ago, the number of brain cells that you have in your brain determines how smart you are. So therefore, while you're on the soccer field playing for me and my soccer team, just don't get knocked around too much. Or, when you get a bit older, don't go on binge drinking too much, because you're gonna hurt your brain cells, and you're gonna become a less smart person. And of course, as I am now, is a very intelligence-oriented person. So I did a lot of effort to protect my noggin from getting collided by anybody, because I wanted to stay just as smart as I was. And my whole life would be a matter of preserving my level of intelligence and making sure that nothing bad happened to me. But of course, in the intervening decades, brain science has actually gone the other way around. There's this new concept. The concept is called neuroplasticity. And it comes from looking at people who have been brain damaged, looking at people who are learning new things for the first time, looking at the way that children's brains grow and develop. And if you've ever been on these apps like Luminosity, I've totally got my mother on this app at the moment. It's the idea that it's not so much the sheer number of brain cells. I'm sorry, Mrs. McGregor, but the science has moved on. It's the idea that it's about the quality, the depth, and the frequency of the connections between those cells. So if you've been brain damaged, or if you're a child just growing into your cranium, or if you're someone trying to stave off the effects of, say, Alzheimer's as you get a little bit older, the more you practice it, the better your brain is going to get at firing, the deeper the connections are going to go, the better the left-right connections between different sides of your brain is going to develop. And actually, you can recover from things like brain damage, at least in part. You can learn to do things that you haven't done before. So that whole thing is grounded in the science of actual brain chemistry and the way the brain is wired. Dr. Carol Dweck then asked the question, okay, so if that's true, if we're not fixed and we don't have to do what Stephen thought he had to do when he was 8 years old and preserve his brain cells, but instead we think of the brain act like any other muscle, you got to work it out and you'll get swole as a result of doing that. What does that mean for individuals in their lives and in their work? She encapsulates this meaning into what she calls growth mindset. So I'm going to share this video with you that explains her thoughts on what that really means.
Researcher and professor Carol Dweck uses the term mindset to describe the way people think about ability and talent. Dweck delineates between two different mindsets that exist on a continuum. The first is the fixed mindset, which suggests that your abilities are innate and unchangeable. The second is a growth mindset, which views it as something you can improve through practice. In a fixed mindset, you view failure as permanent, but with a growth mindset, you see failure as a chance to learn and even pivot. Those with a fixed mindset are more likely to view critical feedback as a personal attack, while those with a growth mindset will see it as a chance to improve, where they can develop new systems. With a fixed mindset, you're more likely to choose easier tasks and put in minimal effort. After all, if talent is fixed, why bother improving? Why even try? But with a growth mindset, you're more likely to embrace challenging tasks and work hard to improve. Those with a fixed mindset are likely to give up when they face an obstacle. Meanwhile, those with a growth mindset will view obstacles as a chance to experiment and solve problems. In a fixed mindset, the focus is on measurable accomplishments. But with a growth mindset, the focus is more on a journey of continual improvement. With a fixed mindset, you're less likely to take creative risks. But with a growth mindset, creative risks are simply a way to innovate and improve. Ultimately, your mindset influences everything from creative risk-taking to how you view feedback to whether or not you finish difficult tasks. And in the end, it's one of the greatest factors in determining whether or not you grow and improve in your abilities.
Right, absolutely astounding stuff. So, growth mindset. Let's review what we talked about in that video. Essentially, it talks about two ends of the spectrum. The end that I may have mislearned from science at the time, and this new and that is implied by the science of neuroplasticity. Its implications for basic personal qualities then fall through to everything about how we, as individuals, think about our achievements, our challenging situations, failure, feedback, and other people's success. With a fixed mindset, we're looking at other people's basic personal qualities and we're like, oh, you're just born with it. Whereas with the growth mindset, it's something that you can learn. And we can kind of extrapolate this idea through to things like failure. If I've got a fixed mindset, like I can't get better, right? So if I fail at something, it's an indicator of the very limit of who I am. So I'm actually going to do stuff like avoid it, and I fear failing. Whereas for people with growth mindset, they're like, well, you know what? My current state right now is only like a little portion about where I'm going to be in the future. So therefore, if I fail now, all it really is a piece of learning. And of course, I should state before we move on too much more, that it would be wrong to say an individual person is a fixed mindset person or an individual person is a growth mindset person. A, the reality is that most people lie on some spectrum somewhere. And B, it's totally possible that for different aspects of your life, you choose a different area of the spectrum to sit on. I know, for example, someone that we coached at a large financial institution. He was a leader of people. And he said, actually, what I discovered is I've got a really fixed mindset with respect to my family and how can I improve relations with them. But actually with work, I'm kind of a growth mindset person. And I can see that something stymie my family just as a result of me thinking I can't change or we can't change. And of course, I have great career success because I consider, exactly as we're articulating on this slide, every challenging situation piques my interest. Every failure is something I can learn from. So to be clear, this is not an exercise in putting people in boxes, but it's simply an exercise to demonstrate the varied levels of thinking that humans apply to themselves and indeed to different aspects of their lives. I encourage you to think about things that you want to improve in and how you might have growth mindset following this pattern of thinking. So let's talk about feedback. When we talk about feedback, if you've got a fixed mindset, that could be a personal attack. If you've got a growth mindset, instead it's a chance for improvement. And my very, very favorite one here, other people's success. Right? If you're scrolling down at Instagram and you see that everyone's more beautiful than you, you're scrolling down Facebook, everyone's having more fun than you. I don't know if anybody's particularly having fun during COVID anyway. But if you scroll down LinkedIn, you see everyone's having greater professional success than you. With someone with a fixed mindset, that might give you feelings of jealousy. You can't get better. You can't improve. You can't do anything more than you've currently got. But hopefully you can be just like that scholar of human nature, Mr. Will Smith once said about people. If you're the smartest homeboy in your crew, then you're in the wrong crew. Be the dumbest homeboy in your crew so that other people's success, you can be part of that success ecosystem. So that's talking about growth mindset and the spectrum. So of course, everybody's got in their head a little voice they have. Thinking about your work, thinking about your teams, thinking about your company, thinking about your family, right? Your little voice in your head is going to say things to you like, you're not good at this. You can reply to it and say, you know what? I'm not good yet. I'm going to give it a hot darn good go. I'm going to learn. Oh, you might even say to yourself, I'm great at this. Well, you know what? There's a bunch of intellectual arrogance that's going to go with that. But you can say to yourself, well, I'm good at it because I practiced and I learned how to do it, which will give you the right humility to tackle new and different things in the future. This thing is too hard? Fine. It just means that it will require effort and strategy. It's too easy? Fine. Look for ways to make it more challenging. And of course, you can reply to almost every single thing, every single little demon on your shoulder that tells you can't do something with a growth mindset angel that tells you something, don't even try this because you might fail. Your growth mindset angel might tell you something like, if I fail, I can try again, just smarter than I did last time. Okay, I'm going to throw it over to you guys now and give you an opportunity to just be silent for 20, 30 seconds. Have a think about yourself. What's one thing that you want to commit to yourself that you can do, that you can start doing, do differently, do better, or do less of? Just one thing. Now that you've become more familiar with this concept, okay, if you'd like to share, I'd encourage you to write it into the chat, but I'll bring this thing up. Pick one thing. What's a voice that you hear? And by the way, these are simply examples. Come up with one that's unique to you. I'll give you 30 seconds or so just to have a think about it before we move on from this section. And again, if you want to share in the chat, very happy for you to type out there. Okay, hopefully you came up with a personal growth mindset thing that you'll do differently. I think you, Byron, you made a really, really great comment there. One thing that I'll do more of is to be conscious about when I'm exhibiting behaviors of a fixed mindset. Yeah, definitely. I know that for myself. I might get triggered actually as a leader of people and the person who trains other people to be growth mindset. I actually have occasionally I have a fixed mindset habit around people who I notice have a fixed mindset. I tag them as fixed mindset and I have to remind myself that I should be kind and caring and coachy and trainy to them so that they can have an environment in which is expected or enabled to become more growth mindset themselves. So everyone can always improve in these areas insofar as much as they're willing to. Thank you, Byron, for sharing that. Let's move on to the second concept, psychological safety. We've talked about you as an individual, but let's talk about teams. So we're going to have two pretend teams here, apples and oranges. So in team Apple, this team is made up of exceptionally smart and successful people only. This team are filled with 3 to 9 professionals who speak only on topics at which they're expert and when they're asked. When they do speak, they speak at length, explaining what they think the group ought to do. And then when other people interject or there's a side comment or something that's not particularly important, the speaker's like, oh, okay, cool, thank you for your contribution. But let me convey the rest of this. We'll get the meeting and agenda back on track. It feels, if you look at it from the outside, like a super effective meeting. The team does not indulge in idle chit-chat or long debate. If you watch the conversational log from the team, it would be very precise. You could almost just take it as a neat transcript if you were writing it out as a recording or something. And then the meeting ends on time, everyone goes straight back to work, and they're done. That's Team Apple. I want you to hold the vision of Team Apple in your head. Now I'm going to tell you about a different team, Team Oranges. So in Team Orange, this team is evenly divided by successful managers and middle managers that have few professional accomplishments. Teammates, when you watch their conversation, they kind of come in and out of different kinds of discussion. If it's like a Zoom chat, some of them are like off doing something else, or that, maybe they're fidgeting with something on the table, even in the middle of the conversation. People interject and go, oh, you meant this. Oh, no, I meant that. Oh, hey, I got an idea based on what you said. If you follow the flow of the conversation, you transcribed it, it'd be interruptions all over the place. When a team member changes topic, some of the time, everyone else is like, oh, that's really interesting. And they head off on that tangent, even if it had nothing to do with the original agenda. Sometimes, when the meeting ends, the meeting doesn't actually end. Everyone sits around and they talk about their lives. They talk about other things. They're like, oh, how are you? They just have other kinds of conversations. So I want you to hold this in your head. Team Apple, Team Orange. And you don't really have to tell me, but I'd for any brave soul, I'd love for you to write into the chat of who you think the more effective team is in terms of real performance measures on behalf of their organization. Like how much revenue did this team generate? How many lines of code did they create? How much product did they ship? How did they satisfy their customer? One organization set out to do precisely that. And the team Apple and Team Oranges is actually from their story, right? That organization is called Google. They went on this quest to find a perfect team. Later on, you're going to get this slide pack. You're going to get a bunch of links. The full article, it's a few thousand words, is in the New York Times. It's called Google's Quest to Find the Perfect Team. They studied hundreds of teams. They spent millions of dollars on research. They looked at 51,000 employees and they measured the bejeebus out of it because, they're Google and they can. So after 3 years of study, I won't spill the beans for you. I'll let someone who was actually there tell you about what their findings were and what happened.
One of the biggest questions is how to build the perfect team. And in fact, about 4 years ago, Google invited me to come spend some time with them because they were in the middle of a big project called Project Aristotle, a huge data study to try and figure out how to build the perfect team at Google. Initially, their hypothesis was that the best teams are teams where you put people together who like each other, right? Maybe you need a good mix of extroverts and introverts. Maybe you need people who are friends away from the conference room. And so they looked at the data and they did experiments and they found that who was on a team actually didn't matter at all. They couldn't find any correlations between team membership and team success. So then they started looking at how a team interacts. And this is where suddenly everything became clear. Because what they found is that the people who are on a team matter much, much less than how those people interact. That you could have enemies on a team together, or you could have strangers or friends or people who don't get along, or all introverts or all extroverts. And as long as they treat each other a certain way, as long as there's a certain culture, then that team will gel. So as they started looking at these behaviors, what they found was that there were two in particular that mattered more than anything else. The first was called equality in conversational turn-taking. During a meeting or a set of meetings, if everyone speaks at roughly the same amount, then that team is much more likely to succeed. But just speaking isn't actually enough. The second characteristic that teams need in order to do well is called ostentatious listening. That basically, in addition to encouraging you to talk more, I, as a team leader or team member, have to show you that I'm listening by doing things like repeating what you just told me or closing my computer so I can make eye contact with you. If you have these two characteristics, conversational turn-taking and ostentatious listening, it creates what psychologists refer to as psychological safety. And psychological safety is shown as the single greatest correlate with a group's success. When a group feels like they are psychologically safe with each other, you unlock their best ideas, their ability to work together, their innovative capacities. Google's fundamental belief, as is true for many other companies, is that it's only when a team comes together that you actually get the best ideas out of each person and the best work at getting things done.
Okay, was that inspiring? That's inspiring to me. Every time I watch it, I'm like, yeah, let's go make psychologically safe teams. So let's talk about it, right? Originally, Google's actual hypothesis, if you read the article, it's this. It's like, oh, you know what? We're going to find the perfect team composition. It'll have like exactly this many men, this many women, this many senior people, this many junior people, this many people of different racial backgrounds, this many developers, this many testers, this many analysts, and it'll be perfect. It's all about team composition when I do that. And what they found was super surprising. It really has very little to do with team composition. And this is Google, by the way, right? They care about this stuff. They're measuring every KPI, or they call them OKRs, which is a little bit different, about this stuff. And they metricize it, and they know what the outcome looks like. They found their hypothesis wrong. But of course, like any good scientist, a null hypothesis is actually a good thing. What happens is they discovered, okay, well, what is it instead? Instead, it was these two things: conversational equality. So that would be something like, let me delve into a little bit. It would be something like if we drew a pie chart, right, of everyone talking in a room at a given time. Pick a Zoom meeting, for example, right? If you drew a pie chart of who's talked when or who's contributed when, even on this webinar, what does it look like? It'd be like 99% Stephen, 0.05% Byron, 0.05% Edwina for contributing on chat, right? It actually means that, we're a certain level of intelligence as a team. But I guarantee you, there's stuff that you guys know right now that you're jumping down on your lunch, and I'm not telling you to not do that, but we could be smarter together as a crew, as a webinar, if you asked, for example, more questions, or I gave you lots of opportunity to contribute and add to the conversation. The second part of it, though, it's not just enough to ask your team members, hey, what do you think about that? Or make space for them, right? You have to also listen. And that idea is called ostentatious listening. You ever see, I think it's 1999 as well. I'm showing you my vintage. There's a David Fincher film, Fight Club, right? Starring Brad Pitt and, what's her name? Characters are Marla Singer. Anyway, these two characters, they're, a little bit, they're not particularly inured with society. Edward Norton, thank you, Edwina. They're not particularly inured with society, and a little bit antisocial. Two of them, they go to AA type meetings, but they're things like people with like a brain parasite or blood cancer or something like that, a bone marrow or something like that, and then they go to it. They don't actually have it, but they're just there to hang out with the people. And then the two characters, they both know each other as a fake, right? So the guy grabs the girl and he's like, I know that you're a fake. Why are you coming to these AA meetings? You're just faking it. You're not really dying of like brain cancer. It's like, why? So why are you doing it? And she says something like, when people think that you're dying of brain cancer, instead of just waiting for their turn to speak, they actually listen to you. right? So, I mean, that film goes in some other weird tangents, but that's a very human moment, right? These two people who are super disconnected from society, right, think, oh, you know what? One of the most important ways that I can connect to society is, gosh, being able to talk and having someone actually listen. I want you to think about you and your teams. How often when you're having a conversation, of course, we're all trying to get their points out. I'm trying to get my point out to you right now, right? But when someone else is speaking, are you actually like, whoa, 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 like, wait a minute. Let me really, really, really try and affirm and understand and take in what this person is saying, including asking questions that like drag a little bit more out of them to get to the goodness of where they are. If you belong to a team that's got these two characteristics, right? Everyone in the team tries to talk an equal amount, not in every meeting, but perhaps over long periods of time. And B, within that meeting, when someone talks, everyone's kind of like, oh, tell us more about that. Oh, help us understand that better. Oh, help us drag all the goodness out of you so that we can understand it. My question to you is, how do you feel when you're part of a team like that? Well, hopefully you feel freaking great. What are you more likely to do? Hopefully when you feel freaking great and you're part of a team that cares about that sort of thing, you're much more willing to put yourself perhaps in personal risk to say, hey, I kind of got an idea about this, risk of ridicule or risk of someone else shooting down your ideas. If you feel like at least other people are going to listen to you and give that idea time, they're not attacking the person, they might be attacking the idea. When you do that, you enable, hopefully, what every organization really wants its people to do, which is to have a true contest of ideas. So sometimes I think psychological safety is a bit of a misnomer because it's got the word safety in there. It's true that people do need to feel safe to say their ideas and have them heard. But it's not safe in a sense that like no one's allowed to oppose you. If you've got conversational quality, ostentatious listening, you're saying that everyone gets a chance to speak and totally will be heard when they speak. But it doesn't mean that everyone is going to agree with everyone else at all times. Okay? So, there's going to be some tumult with respect to that. But it enables that contest of ideas. It doesn't mean that everyone's going to be super, super nice to each other because that would almost be the opposite of the thing that we're trying to aim for. So I took this straight out of that article, right? Project Aristotle is a reminder that companies are always trying to go optimize people, optimize people, optimize people. The best way to optimize people? Take it from me, who've been coaching organizations all over the world about how to optimize their organization. You just optimize the way that people talk to each other. You care about them. You get them to care about each other. When you do that, it'll optimize itself. You don't need to build some super elaborate system. So I'm going to throw it over to you. Here are some pro tips. I want you to take a minute and commit to yourself to think about, now that you learned about the psychological safety thing, please write it down if you feel comfortable with it, about what you're going to do differently. And I've got some tips up on the screen here for you, and I'll read them out as I give you some time to think and type and write. So if you're an extrovert like me, I'm a super extrovert, right? You know that you're prone to talk over other people, right? You're like, why can't I get the introverts to speak? And again, by the way, people are in extrovert boxes or introvert boxes. It's a real bell curve of human behavior, which can be different for different people in different times and different scenarios. So, let's celebrate the differences in humanity here. Some of the ways that you can help introverts create more conversational quality is by sharing the agenda ahead of time. By asking questions and then allowing excruciatingly long pauses from the perspective of an extrovert. For an introvert, it's just a normal pause while they gather their thoughts and give you an answer. For extroverts, a really good technique is to imagine there's a stick that's being held when someone is talking. And your job as a very extroverted person is often to grab the stick from another extrovert and then pass it to an introvert. So, there's Jack and Jill, and Jack is always talking and Jill's never contributing, but Jill's got good ideas. You're like, oh, that's a great idea, Jack. Thank you for that. So mentally you're grabbing the stick from Jack. What do you think about that, Jill? And you're passing the conversational stick to Jill, so Jill's got a space to speak. If you're an Agile coach, you know that we love using things like little cards to get everybody to write down their ideas at the same time. So there's an evenness in doing that. And even my technique right now of asking you to write things down in the chat if you want to, so that I can respond to it, is a way for me to allow whoever's, shoveling food into their mouth at lunchtime now, or just a bit shy about turning the camera on and contributing, you get an opportunity to write and ask me questions anyway, if you want to. If we ever go back to this face-to-face thing, I strongly recommend things like physical and verbal interrupts, things like, you probably don't touch anyone everywhere, but like shoulders are a very safe place to touch. If you hear a person rambling and they're on and, you're kind of like, hey, can I get a word in edgewise? Actually, sometimes just walk straight up to them and touch them. They're like, whoa, whoa, whoa. Then you get an opportunity to interject and pass the conversation. Things like meeting hygiene. Sometimes at the start of your meeting, you can go, hey guys, I learned about this concept of psychological safety. You can teach it to them and then remind them meeting to meeting even a year down the line. Things like getting everyone to speak at the start. When I do face-to-face training, I'll get everyone to introduce themselves for 30 seconds. So they talk right at the start of the meeting. It makes it easier for them to talk later. And there's a great question here from Lisa. How do we apply these tips in a more distributed environment? Any key differences? Oh, great. I would say you need to teach and enable people to use the tools a lot more. So I love Zoom because Zoom has got a great plethora of tools. I find, not that I'm endorsing anything or anything else, I do find Microsoft Teams very limited, whereas Hangouts is somewhere in the middle in terms of those tools. So I'm talking about things like the like and dislike button. Have a team policy of, sometimes someone asks a question. Is it that everybody just puts their thumb up on the video and they go, yeah, I agree? Because some people need verbal affirmation. Oh, I disagree. Or do you use the buttons? Is it perfectly okay to hit that button that no one ever hits, which is the coffee button, to say, hey, this meeting's been going for a really long time. Can we take a break? It's creating explicit policies to enable people to contribute without necessarily interrupting each other, because you can't really replace the bandwidth of body language when you're on Zoom. But certainly ways that you can do that is things like turning your video on, using the like and dislike buttons and having a policy for what that means, using visuals like sometimes we have like I like this or I don't like this post-it notes that you can hold up on your video so that people presenting or talking can see whether someone likes it or not. You just give them a lot of visual cues and a lot of interpersonal feedback that otherwise would be missing from a Zoom-based conversation. Thank you for the question, Lisa, and hopefully I've given you some pro tips that you can take away from that. Okay, so hopefully you've come up with a pro tip for how you might improve you and your teams in terms of their psychological safety, either creating a more equal conversation or more giving people more feedback or active listening when you're receiving something that they have to say. All right, I'm going to take you to the last idea. We talked about growth mindset, which is personal applicability. We talked about psychological safety, which is a team concept. What about for leaders? So the story here is about a gentleman by the name of David Marquet. It's not just David Marquet, it's Commander David Marquet. He was the commander of a US submarine, nuclear submarine to be specific. The way that he tells the story is that, he went to the Navy version of West Point Quantico, I think it's called, and he studied at Naval Academy to be a captain of a submarine. And then sort of at the last minute, he was studying for submarine A, I think it's called the Olympia. And at the last minute, they were like, oh, by the way, we're going to switch you to a totally different other submarine of a different class, of a different design. Sure, you spent a whole year learning about submarine A, but we just need you to command submarine B. We need you to get ready for an inspection in 2 weeks, and we need it to be shipped out into the Pacific or Atlantic or whatever, into active service, and you need to command these 144 men and women. And the way that he tells the story was that he was so terrible on his first day as a commander of this submarine that he gave an order like, I want the ship to go 3/4 speed forward. And that order got conveyed 7 people down the line of command. And then when he said go, the ship didn't move. And he's like, why isn't anyone following my orders? I wanted to move 3/4 speed forward. Only for his XO to tell him, sir, the ship doesn't have quarter speeds. It's only got thirds. I can only move at 1/3, 2/3 or full speed. Right? There is no quarters. So the way that he tells the story, he had a big crisis of confidence. He locked himself in his room for a day, had a mild panic attack or a major panic attack. And he came out, when he came back out, he decided to be a very different kind of leader. And this is the story of the kind of leader that he decided to be.
I was trained for one submarine, my guys were trained to do what they were told. That's a deadly combination. We all know organizations where people just follow the leader into disastrous situations. So I got my guys together and I said, hey, we got a problem here. I was trained for another submarine. You're trained to do whatever nonsense comes out of my mouth. That's right, Captain. I mean, they knew. They already knew. I was pretty much talking to myself. So I said, what are we going to do? What are we going to do, guys? And we talked about it. Okay, what I really wanted to do was get ready for the inspection. But we were sitting in the wardroom. We spent a couple hours. We were talking about it. And we came up with all these different things. And, well, you Captain, you just got to be smarter. You got to give better orders. It's like, well, how am I going to learn a whole nuclear submarine, miles of valves and pipes? I spent a year learning Olympia, 2 weeks over here. So in a year, we'll be safe? That's not going to work. We had to deploy the submarine in 6 months. So we talked about it, and they said, okay, there's only one logical solution. We figured it out. You, they're pointing at me, you shut up. What do you mean? That's not what captains do. That's not what captains of nuclear submarines do. They walk around. They give orders. They sound like Russell Crowe. Head 2/3, dive, make it up 500 feet. Helm left 15 degrees rudder, steady course 255. Load torpedoes and tubes 1, 2, 3, and 4. Flood down, open outer doors, right? And I thought about it. And you know what? They were right. So at that point, I vowed never to give another order. And if you came down on my submarine, it would have been very confusing because you couldn't have pointed. It would have been hard to say, well, who's the captain here? Because you wouldn't have seen me giving orders. I did retain one order. The final order to launch a weapon, a torpedo or a missile, I kept with me because I felt that since that was going to result in the deaths of other human beings, that I didn't want that on anyone's conscience but mine. That was my moral and ethical responsibility. But even though everything else in the Navy, there's long lists of things that says the captain has to authorize. Captain should authorize. You got a couple nukes in your group, they'll tell you it's true. Captain authorize, submerge the ship, get underway, start up the reactor, shut down the reactor, connect to shore power, divorce from shore power. On and on, break rig for dive, on and on and on, pages of these things. I just refused to give those orders. What we replaced it with was intent. Instead of giving instructions, if you want your people to think, don't give instructions, give intent. So they would come to you, hey, what do you want me to do? Well, left full rudder, steady course 255. No. I say, well, what are we trying to accomplish here today? Well, we're trying to get in position so that when the enemy submarine comes through, okay, so where do you think we should position the ship? Maybe over here. Good idea, go there. You give intent to them and they give intent to you. So my officers stopped requesting permission. And every other submarine, Captain, request permission to submerge the ship. Submerge the ship. Submerge the ship, aye. On the Santa Fe, Captain, I intend to submerge the ship. Very well. And they did it. And it might seem like it's a very small, nuanced change of language, but it was hugely powerful because the psychological ownership now shifts to them. They need to discover the answer. Otherwise, you're always the answer man. You can never go home and eat dinner. And so we started doing this. And it was hugely powerful. Actually, we went another step. Then I got smarter and I said, when the officer said, Captain, I intend to submerge the ship, I would ask him, well, what do you think I'm thinking right now? And he'd look at me, hard to tell. I'm guessing you're wondering whether it's safe. Bingo! I said, well, convince me it's safe. He said, Captain, I intend to submerge the ship. All men are below, hatches are shut, ship's rigged for dive. I checked the bottom depth. The submarine's in the water that's been assigned to us. Then later I would ask them, is it the right thing to do? And they would say, well, yes, sir, because our mission requires that we... And these are the two pillars that I think support this idea of giving control. These are the two pillars that need to be in place. The technical competence, which is represented by, is it safe? And the organizational clarity, which is represented by, is it the right thing to do? And you put those things in place, and then you can give control. And you give control, and you put those things in place. And you are off to the races. So think about what's happening now. My officers are starting to think like me, because I have to think like, where should we do the ship? And so the guys below them. Now this took 24 hours to happen. It took a couple years for the full implementation, but immediately there was change. The officers started thinking like me, and so pretty soon I could go in the engine room, find the engine room lower level watch who was taking logs in the lube oil pumps, and he would know what the submarine was doing. He would know whether we were up tight, close to the enemy, and it was time to stay quiet, or whether we had backed out a little bit, and this may be a good time to change filters and make a little bit of noise. A year later, we received another inspection. A year later, we received an inspection. The inspecting team gave us the highest grade they had ever seen. Not that year, not in the Pacific, ever seen. Why? I mean, this crew had a captain who was a dummy. It's because that needle started moving up. And on another submarine, there was one guy in charge, one guy giving orders, one guy thinking, and 134 people doing what they're told. I don't care how smart you are. On my submarine, I got 135 thinking, active, passionate, creative, proactive, taking initiative people. It's a tidal wave. You don't stand a chance. Here's the solution. Move the authority to where the information is. You mean the software engineer can decide whether we ship the software? Yeah. You mean the client, my salesman can close the deal? Well, up to $1,000. No. Yes. Whatever the price? Yes. What does it take to make that happen? Now, if you're picturing a lot of people out there doing crazy things and a bunch of arrows going in a bunch of different directions, you have the wrong picture. You create the environment so that those people are out there making decisions as if the CEO were standing right behind them. And if it's not the same decision, it's actually a better decision because they have the information. And not only will you get better speed of execution, because now you don't have this delay, what happens is those people feel like they matter because they're thinking. You engender thinking. You create the environment for thinking. The secret is nothing I said is hard. There's nothing hard. The only thing that's hard is you. It will feel wrong. You've been genetically and culturally programmed to take charge and make it happen. Take control and attract followers. And what you want is to give control and create leaders. It will feel wrong, and you will repeatedly start down this path if you so choose, and then you'll be angry at yourself like I was. And you will have a failure, and you'll go back to the old ways. And you will pick yourself up, and you will go again, and you will go again. And by doing so, you will achieve the greatest thing possible. You will have achieved greatness, not because of the deeds and acts that you did, but because you set an environment where the people around you and their families and their schools and their organizations and their businesses, they've achieved greatness. That will be the greatest thing of all. Go forth and be great.
All right. Motivating, right? Motivating. Every one of these videos is amazingly motivating from that perspective. So what is he talking about? He's talking about leadership. Everybody's a leader. He's talking about some basic ideas. Let's make it safe to make mistakes and speak up. What are we talking about? Psychological safety. We're talking about for leaders to set their intent, right? It's a language thing, allowing the authority to make decisions to the people that actually know about it. The leader's job then becomes fixing the environment, not the people. We're talking about not just proving people wrong or anything like that, but improving them. And we're talking about making sure that people have the right competency, and we've got ever less control as people build the competency, but allowing them to grow into that trust. So if that sounds a lot like the natural outcome of understanding this neuroplasticity thing and then creating growth mindset, creating then teams that are psychologically safe, this is definitely the cherry on top. How should leaders act? And that's a number one question we get asked as an Agile consultancy. Hey, I'm a general manager at X organization. I've engaged you, Moss guys, to transform my organization. We're going to get more effective ways of working. But what does that mean for me? What does that mean for our role? And our answer is always, this is the new kind of leader that you're going to be. I'm going to coach you. I'm going to grow you into this kind of leadership. Okay, and of course, just like any of the speakers today, he's got a book as well, Turn That Ship Around. Is his case study, as well as a workbook for helping you become a more intent-based leader. I'm gonna let you have a think about it. You're a leader in your organization. If you want to, as per previous, take an action for yourself to do something differently, whether it's to read this book, whether it's to adopt this sort of intent-based language, whether it's to take some of the other actions that you had previously. Write it down for yourself so you can take it away post this conversation. Okie dokie. So you're going to get all this pack afterwards. So every single thing that I've talked about, growth mindset, there's the book, there's the video, psychological safety, there's the article, there's the video, there's supporting books by a Charles Dunhig, who you heard from in the middle there, and the video and the book for intent-based leadership as well. Thank you. You've been an absolutely wonderful crowd. I'm going to throw it over to you guys to see if you've got any questions. Take a moment to write any down. If you've got them, I'm very curious to hear from you. Otherwise, I thank you for attending this webinar.